You are the OG SRE, Randy, then.
I don't know about that. I know some serious OGs. I'm not sure I would consider myself one, but thank you. I was a deep AI skeptic. I kind of always have been to a certain degree. I started building ISPs in 1992, 1993. That's before there was a commercial internet.
That's
Um,
before I was born, Randy, by the
yeah,
way.
sorry. I'm going to show my age a lot probably.
All right. Hey, Randy, how are you?
I'm good, Priyank. How are you?
I'm also doing good. So, first of all, thanks a lot, Randy, for taking out the time. I know you have a very tight schedule and very busy person. So, thanks a lot uh, for doing this. And the reason I wanted you on the show was because this format and the approach that we are taking towards technology, towards AI in infra and infrastructure in general, these are kind of topics where a veteran like you would would bring in a lot of insights, and that helps a lot of my audiences. To anybody who is living under the rock, so Randy is with us. He is currently at Mirantis, VP of Technology and Strategy there. Randy co-authored Pets and Cattle. I hope you remember that, Randy.
I do.
And he was an inaugural board director of OpenStack Foundation in 2012. Founded Cloud Scaling, which was acquired by EMC. Brought AT&T and Walmart into OpenStack, and he is the cloud veteran who has given us the vocabulary what we are using day to day. So, welcome again, Randy. Welcome to the root cause.
Yeah, it's great to be here. And the name of your podcast is
Thanks a lot. Awesome. So, let's begin, Randy. This AI space in general has exploded in last 2 3 years. What you are seeing, and you have been in the industry for quite some time. What do you see, and how do you feel about it at the pace that things are moving?
I feel like that's a two-parter, so I'll take it in two parts. So I'm really excited. I think we're about to see some very serious change, and I'll explain why in a second. I was a deep AI skeptic. I kind of always have been to a certain degree, but in early to mid 2024, when I started playing with some of the tools, I started to turn around. I was like, wow, there's something here. And then what's been amazing is how much it's picked up speed and the pace of change. And I went from this is an anomaly or a blip to like, okay, this is going to be like cloud, the internet, or the advent of computers is just going to be like a world altering event that touches the entire IT stack top to bottom. And I want to be in front of that. I was in front of the internet. I started building ISPs in 1992, 1993. That's before there was a commercial internet.
That's before I was born, Randy, by the
Yeah,
way.
sorry. I'm going to show my age a lot probably. And then I was in front of the cloud computing stuff using AWS EC2 in late 2006 when it was in private beta. Nobody knew what it was. And there was one instance size, no VPC, no EBS, none of the things people take for granted now. So there's another one I'm really interested in being in front of. But kind of more importantly, for me, when I was a kid, when I was a teenager and I was using the internet before anybody knew what it was, and I was using Unix before Linux existed. And, just that was my hobby. When I went home from school, I was hacking on stuff and I was writing code and I was doing systems administration, and it was all all computer stuff. You know, it was just fun, puzzle solving for me. And, that led into my first job doing systems administration. And everybody was doing everything manually in 1990. And I'm like, I'm not going to do it manually. The computer could do that for me. I'll just write some code that'll like automate the configuration of all the config files for our 300 server fleet at this, semiconductor startup. And so I did it. And then every single job I had after that, I automated everything I could. And so I look at what AI can do and I'm like, wow, man, this is like automation plus, 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 plus. We can really empower people. And the thing that I'm most frustrated about, that I'm happy that I'm on your podcast to talk about, is people are paying so much attention to AI assisted coding that they're not thinking about AI assisted operations. There's a few people, there's you, there's the Commodore folks, there are people dabbling in it, but the level of investment, the number of people who are thinking about AI assisted ops, it's just not enough. There's not enough investment. And the level of toil, yes, developers have to do a lot of toil. But if you look at operations folks, the level of toil they have is ridiculous. They're constantly in this mode of paying down technical debt and spending 80, 90% of the time either paying that technical debt down or dealing with operational problems. And they can't spend time improving the systems. And it doesn't matter whether you adopt SRE or DevOps or any other discipline. It's just that like the tooling and the culture and a bunch of the things need to change. And the opportunity is now to make a serious mind shift in how operations works and to use AI to help us. And I think between the underinvestment and then people being gun shy, oh, we can't let agents touch production, there's we don't have enough momentum, and I'm hoping we build it soon.
Awesome. Absolutely. And I think you hit the pain points exactly. I'm very young. I have been in the industry for just around a decade. And one thing I felt is it's not a very like pleasing moment when you have to go and fix a production issue. The timings are totally off, and every time you do a release on a Friday, that's the meme, right? You do a deployment on Friday and the whole the weekend goes. You don't have to even uh, you know worry about it. The thing is, this pain point, and you're rightly addressing that, the investment and people coming to the space is very low. I have been seeing a bit of uh, opposite insight, and it could be due to the algorithms social media has, because I am working in the same domain, so I keep seeing stuff. But I'm seeing a lot of rise in the AI SRE era or operations era. The reason being the natural shift from after post development, what it could be. I think it's naturally tending towards operations, right? So a lot of companies who are thinking a bit of tomorrow would be typically picking up the space and working something on it. What do you say?
Yeah, so I definitely think a lot of people have identified that, AI assisted operations is an opportunity that's underserved. But at the same time, the cynic in me looks at some of these, and I won't name any names, and I see companies with founders who have zero operational experience. And I am like, you're going to have a very hard time figuring out how to serve operators if you haven't had their real world experiences. And I think people think they can get around that by kind of using product management techniques to go in and do customer interviews and try to understand their pain points and problems and all the typical stuff. But the problem is that as somebody who's delivered a bunch of products to market, when you go in through that product management process, a lot of what you're trying to do is suss out what the customers are not telling you, to read between the lines. And you cannot do that with operations staff and operations executives unless you have operations experience. And so you may just be serving what they tell you are the symptoms, as opposed to trying to figure out what the underlying causes are. Because as I look at this, I say to myself, okay, if AI agents can start taking operators and making them 10x operators, if it can speed everything up in operations like it's speeding it up in software development, then a bunch of the things that we've done before, trying to patch operations with heavyweight procedures and things like ITIL and ITSM and all that, that will break. All of that will break, right? You even just look at what's happening with vulnerabilities right now, and the speed of vulnerabilities has now like ratcheted way up.
Yeah.
And so the pressure is going to increase on the security teams and the operations teams to respond to that. And if they try to respond with the existing processes and procedures, they will absolutely break under the load. They have to figure out how to use AI assisted operations to allow them to take the fire hose and manage it. And I just don't think that, we have enough of people with real operational background actually trying to work and solve these problems. I see some opportunists. I see a lot more opportunists who are trying to jump into the area because it looks underserved than I'm seeing, real domain experts.
It, I agree to that. And by the way, why do you feel people are not adopting much AI who are into operations? I see a lot of reluctance on SREs, platform engineers that I talk to are very biased, I would say, not to anti AI in most cases. Why do you think that is happening? Security guardrails, what kind
I
of?
think I think it's a bunch of different things. I was just helping my brother out who has been doing security operations like his whole career, network security, and he just hadn't started playing with the tools yet. He didn't know what was possible. And if you look at his day to day job, he spends a massive amount of time on stuff that has very little to do directly with a lot of hands-on security operations like documentation and things like this. How to migrate from one VPN platform to another, all those things that he could use those tools for. So I'm starting to try to help him level up. So I think, some of it's the classic problem of like operators are so snowed in, they're so overwhelmed by, the 80, 90% toil that they have, that thinking about adopting new tools is just really low on the priority list. So they need to be encouraged, they need to be empowered. People need to bake the tooling on top of the generic agents so that there's more operations centric tooling. And then I think there's the big, thing that we sort of just discussed, which is the risk aversion. Almost everybody in operations is risk averse. The security operations folks, network, everybody. And there has to be some way to prove to folks that they can start leaning on AI agents to remove toil. And I think that begins in order to build trust, engender trust. The best way to begin is to apply agents in the areas where it's read only and they're not taking any potentially destructive actions on the systems. And then I think if you can kind of make those two things happen, we'll start to see that groundswell. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. There will be no choice. Like the environment will force operations people to adopt these tools.
So one thing you also brought in our introductions was the velocity and the pace at which AI is booming. There is a bubble kind of a scenario people are often referring to as an AI bubble. You have seen a lot of bubbles in past, right? Do you feel that is also a factor? People are not able to adapt to the pace that which things are developing. Let's say you are on a blank canvas and something comes in, you are fine, you write it down. But if lot of things come in, you get overwhelmed by the things that are available to you and the directions that are possible, verticals that are possible, that you are too scared to even start. Is that a problem or challenge?
Yeah, I think it's part of sort of this just broader situation, which is like, I've got things under control. Okay, maybe I'm spending 80 or 90% on toil, but I've got a set of vendors of trust. I've got my tools in place. We are keeping the system up. Like, I don't need to make a change. And if I don't need to make a change, I'm not going to. And that's that typical risk aversion that most operations teams have. And rightfully so. That, like, there's no criticism there's also the classic, especially with enterprise IT, enterprise operations team. There's the classic issue of like they've got the vendors that they've got. They want to hear from their vendors what they're going to do, and there's an over dependency on classic legacy enterprise vendors trying to solve modern problems when there's an IT revolution going on, which didn't work well in the cloud days. So of course it won't work well in the AI days. But the the risk aversion, while I understand it, it's like I said, and I'll probably just keep harping on it. Teams will be forced to. They will be forced to adopt these tools because it won't just be CVEs and the increase of vulnerability. There will be a lot of other competing pressures as enterprise development teams start to adopt these tools and ramp up their coding velocity. The level, size, frequency of updates to production will also increase. I forget which podcast I was watching or blog I was reading or whatever, but they were talking about GitHub's increase in commits and since the beginning of the year, and it's an exponential increase, exponential, right? I mean, and so that's GitHub is the canary, right? It's telling us about what's happening everywhere, which that velocity is increased. You just look at my GitHub, and you can see going back all the years how much I've committed, and it's a smattering here or there. In the last 9 months, it's like a metric ton of code that I've been generating using coding agents to do exploration in this operations area. So it's just a matter of when, not if. And so I feel for the operations teams who drag their feet on this, because they are going to be in a world of pain as the pressure increases. This is one of those times where I really strongly believe that you've got to get out in front of it right now. And the thing is like, it's like with cloud, right? Nobody can walk in with a playbook. Your team has to go figure out how these AI tools work and what they mean for you. And what I'm seeing is everybody's kind of doing it slightly differently, and they allow for that. There's not one way, and so you have to go exercise the muscle. There's zero shortcuts, and you cannot depend on your legacy vendors to provide you any kind of solutions anytime
Makes
soon.
sense. Yeah. We are on the section of the podcast. I'm seeing this going in a naturally a direction of pattern recognition. You're identifying a lot of patterns from your past history plus what you are seeing in the industry. Do you feel there is a similar kind of thing that you saw in your journey in your career? You talked about pets and cattles. I was reading about it, and you said that to manage infra you have to treat it like cattle. You don't treat it like your pet. So
Yeah, the cloud native way. Yeah.
yeah, so do you think similar kind of patterns you are seeing repeated over your career journey?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still trying to form some of those opinions. If you kind of look at the timing on the pets versus cattle thing, that came out in about 2011, which was about 5 years after I started using AWS, 4.5 maybe. And for me, I'm about 2 years into this journey, so I still think it's really early. The stuff that I the hints that I'm getting are that there may be such a profound shift that it's kind of hard to get our heads around. Say, for example, if we look at what's happening with AI assisted development, um, they're literally people are literally writing code and learning how to get the agents to write code in such a way that nobody's looking at the code.
Yeah, yeah.
And I know it sounds crazy, and I understand that people feel like that may not be sustainable, but the one thing I've seen when these kind of seismic events happen, when there's a massive transition like that, is that you look at the momentum, and there's just a certain amount of momentum, and when it's just like at this like 45-degree angle, it just won't fall off a cliff. It never falls off a cliff. I remember people in the early days going like, "Oh, Amazon's going to hit a cliff, and there's not going to be enterprise adoption." Never happened. Just straight line up. Same with Google, same with Azure on their cloud offerings. I mean, I just don't see, I, there might be an AI bubble. We might see an economic implosion, but I think adoption of the tools is very early. It's just going to continue. And the things that we see already are that, the model increase in terms of its capabilities is just relatively linear, but at a very fast pace. That people are figuring out how to build the frameworks around the models that make them super powered, to borrow from that name of that agent skill. And you go and you look at, say, Cloud Code, if you could go back a year ago and how good it was, it's nothing like it is now. And then while the model has gotten better, the harness around it has gotten much, much better. And so I think that our ability to figure out how to leverage these tools and use them is very early on. And we are going to increase in our learning and how we leverage them, like we did with cloud and cloud native. And the models are going to increase in their capabilities. Like, we haven't seen what I'm thinking of as system harnesses or operations harnesses yet. They've all been focused around coding. You go take the cloud code system prompt apart, and it's almost all about software development, right? Nobody's done that for operations yet. And so, going back to kind of your question that kicked this off was like, what are the patterns? Well, I think that there's a high probability that, despite what people think, that it's dangerous to let agents operate in production, that it may wind up being that agents do operate in production with very little human oversight over the very long haul. And you might ask yourself, well, how can, that be? And so my kind of early thinking is, well, in the early cloud days, we sort of posited, the pets versus cattle thing and stuff that, hey, right, you don't need staging anymore. You've got production A. And if you're going to do a rollout, you spin up a whole new production B that's exactly the same as production A, right? You bring it all up, right, for the period of time that it takes you to cut over. You synchronize the data, you run your A/B tests, you do some load balancing of some of the capacity over to the new production B. You make sure you're good until the point where you are running production B and you shut off production A. So things like staging environments become less important. And we're going to run multi-cloud, blah blah blah. And a lot of that didn't actually happen. And part of it was because it was complex. It took a lot of, work and attention to detail and toil to make it all happen. Fully automating it with tools to bring up production B was one thing, but doing, kind of a full regression and test harness against it was very, very difficult. And maybe some folks could do it, like the Netflixes of this world, but the average enterprise couldn't. But if you've got AI agents to help you out, a whole bunch of that stuff may suddenly be very, very easy. So now you're doing things like letting agents drive everything, but they're using a lot of the ideas that the humans have had, the patterns that humans have had, to basically give you resiliency and checks and balances in your systems, so that even if they did something catastrophic, there's a clear way for the agents to recover from that failure. It reminds me of some of the times I've seen agents do stupid stuff in my environment where, they delete a file and I'm like, yeah, I didn't want you to delete that file. But I created a rule now. This is just, for example, where they know that when they delete a file, when I ask them to delete a file, they stick it in the archive directory. So now if they ever screw up, which doesn't happen as much anymore, they just go back to the archive directory, they pull it out and they stick it back. So there's a way forward here that I think people can't really see, that I do believe involves agents eventually largely running our systems without much human intervention. Yeah. So how do you sandbox the agents? I'm not sure that there's like a final solution here. But one of the things that I noticed in the case of, for example, OpenClaw, is that the more that OpenClaw was hardened, the less useful it was.
Yeah.
And I'm not suggesting that agents should run free, but I'm wondering, where the trade-off line is. And I think it might be use case dependent. If I've got some kind of agent that is going to be touching very, very secure information, very secure APIs, information silos, whatever. Maybe I want to harden the absolute crap out of it. Whereas if it's like a personal assistant, setting it free on the Mac Mini, maybe that's okay. So what does that mean for operations? Well, I'm not 100% sure yet, but one of the things that I think is interesting is if the AI agents in operations are constrained so much that they can't think out of the box and take certain kinds of actions like search the web to find unique solutions or maybe new latest information about how to solve a problem, then I think, how are they better than traditional automation systems? There has to be some ability to give them to, do their thinking, right? We just identified that the harnesses were a big part of, the increase in quality of what we get from them. Well, a systems harness or an operations harness has to provide a certain amount of capabilities to the agents to basically help in operations. Or maybe you can kind of confine them by role so that they can only access certain information by role. So it's not a bunch of agents who can access all things, but you've got to give them the capability to do more than like do basic web search and write some code and things like that. And so I'm sort of like drifting away from kind of put them in a straitjacket, and I'm sort of more thinking about what I'll call playgrounds, which in my mind is not a sandbox. A sandbox is very, very constrained. It's like, how can we make sure that the agent doesn't do anything that we didn't pre-approve? And I'm like, well, is it really about pre-approving, or is it more about putting them in a space, possibly with other agents, a playground, not a sandbox, where they can do different stuff? They can freestyle in that playground, not on production, but in that playground. They can do certain things. They can write code. They can maybe execute more tool calls, but you've got auditability, you've got traceability. Maybe you've got AI agents who stand aside from that playground, whose job is to provide oversight, who are, the adults in the room who make sure that the kids on the playground don't make a mess. I think there's a variety of ways to approach this that aren't put the agent in a straitjacket. The other thing, to kind of just drift off just a little bit, is I've come to the conclusion that right now everybody's focused on that kind of open claw, aha moment, which is like, hey, I've got this virtual assistant. Is it really going to be a virtual assistant like OpenClaw for operations people? I don't think so. Is it going to be Chat GPT or, Claude? I don't think so. See, the thing is that the difference between the OpenClaw use case and the software developer use case is that operations is inherently a team sport. Yes, developers have teams, but a single developer can do what they need to do to get things done in isolation. They don't need the team. Operations people, hopefully I don't sneeze, sorry. Operations people must have a team. If you're running something in production 24/7, you're not staying awake 24/7. Not only that, but when something happens, if there's an incident or event, you need multiple eyes on it from multiple angles, right? So operations is inherently a team sport in a way that software development and entrepreneurship and many other things just isn't. And so in a team sport, you've got to have these agents be able to talk to each other. You've got to have them sort of have the same situational awareness. You've got to have them be able to come at the problem from different angles and help each other out to resolve it. You've got to work together to do new releases. So I just think that if you're going to have a team, trying to put a straitjacket on every agent is going to make that even harder. So I think there's an in between concept that I'm calling a playground. And I just don't think that people are thinking about that right now. They're very focused on like, let's make sure the agent doesn't do anything that we say it can't. And it's like, well, you know, rather other than a few LLM calls in that case, why wouldn't you just, use traditional deterministic software and make
Is
a
it
whole.
because of just the trust, right? I mean, in my opinion, trust is earned, as you rightly mentioned. Start with a visibility approach, then go for certain actions and stuff. Trust is always earned, and it takes time. and nobody knows what the you know process looks like or AI in operations looks like, they are very reluctant to trust it. And that's the exact problem why people are forcing AI to be a guardrailed or a sandbox thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's right not to trust it, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure that it doesn't even. I'm not sure that doesn't translate to human interactions as well, right? Trust but verify is one of those old things, and I do think that it's right to not trust the agents, but if we're going to get leverage from them, if we're going to get 10x operations, if we're going to dramatically reduce toil, we need to figure out the areas to trust them or at least empower them. And there is a lot of stuff that operations teams do that is not on production systems. A lot,
Yeah.
a ton. Inventory management. What are all the things that I'm managing? Where are they at? What hardware is it? What cloud resources is it? What softwares are running on them? Can you get me an SBOM from, my fleet of Kubernetes clusters running in, US East 1 Amazon so that I can look at, the latest CVE and see how it impacts us. Like all of that could be done in a rapid fashion in the same way that we do code reviews in a rapid fashion by AI agents. So there's massive amounts of operational toil if you take aside doing any production interactions other than read only. There's like probably 75% of what operators do is toil that could be taken over by AI agents, right? And not only that, but like I still think that people are like not using their imagination. If the velocity of CVEs is going to increase and your time to address them is going to shorten, then having some AI agents that like monitor CVEs, monitor news, and automatically, do an analysis against your current systems to determine your risk and then deliver that to a human for evaluation, that could be cut to like 5 minutes, which gives you longer time to respond, right? If you take like a full day to figure out there's a CV and determine that it impacts you, you lost a full day. Whereas if an agent does it, it can be done in 5 minutes or less. So there's just places here where people have to use their imagination. And I don't think it's very hard. You just have to be willing to understand that like all of the old ways of doing operations, pretty much probably all of those are going to be thrown out, over the coming 5 to 10 years.
But I also personally feel if you restrict AI on certain things, if you don't try to change or be very rigid on certain traditional approaches, things are not gonna cut out, because things have shifted. And rightly mentioned, it this is a canon event. If you will not adapt, somebody else is going to, and that is going to impact you in certain ways. Developers have already adopted AI, and now their output is going to be your input for operations. And if you do not change, then that's gonna be a very massive shift or pressure that you'll start feeling. So by the way, what do you think is the timeline that you see autonomous operations will start to happen very, or a common thing in the industry? Is it 2 years, 10 years?
I don't think I can call out a timeline. I think it'll be very slow and then suddenly fast.
Just like clock, what was that? Open claw.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes to what I've been, kind of hitting at over and over is more of an idea of a systems harness or an operations harness, right? Like when I'm using, Cloud Code and, it's to the point where you can do these things like you can set a goal and so you can tee everything up. You can build a plan, a specification for what you're going to build. You can create sort of like the test plan. You can create end-to-end live scenario testing so it can validate that everything works. You can set up adversarial reviews, so that you have use other models, like I use Codex and Gemini to do an adversarial review, give you feedback on the code base. You can set up architecture reviews with agents, and you can put all that together, and then you can fire Claude at it and say, your goal is to make sure all the end-to-end test pass and all the feedback from adversarial reviews and architects is integrated, and it'll run that thing as long as it can overnight for hours and hours and hours until it comes to a conclusion for you to look at. And that's all the harness. That's all the harness. Where's the harness for operations and systems where, you know, you go to make a change in production and you're following the path, and the AI agent pops up that whose job is change management and says, did you get sign off? Did you talk to whomever? Did you follow the process? And it walks you through it all and maybe notifies in real time and helps you get sign off if you need to make the change. Where is the AI agent that watches what you do to make sure that there's a full audit trail, so that if a mistake is made, because operator mistakes are, a big cause for production incidents, that there's a way to go back and do the blameless postmortem and understand what happened, so we can make sure it doesn't happen the next time. There's all of these sort of like facets to how operations is done, incident response, running war rooms when there's a sub one, all of these things that, aren't in any kind of harness anywhere. They're in institutional knowledge, tribal knowledge, they're in papers and presentations, but they're not in the harnesses. They're nowhere in the harnesses. I've gone over Claude Code's system prompt with a fine tooth comb. And then more importantly, like if we look at like a lot of the traditional operational tribal knowledge, institutional knowledge, documented ways of handling things, a lot of it's old in the tooth at this point. It doesn't take into account what you can do, in, sort of an AI era, right? And so, there's a lot here to change for operations. And I think it goes from how we build and deploy systems to how we operate them in real time, to how we provide visibility and transparency to the rest of the business. Like, I think all of that gets impacted and changed. I mean, there's so much to say there. It would take us a bunch of podcasts to get through it all. But as one, for example, immutable operating systems and trusted computing platforms have been around forever now, and they are not broadly adopted because the level of effort and pain to sort of deal with them is very, very high. But if you can train a bunch of agents to basically handle a lot of that for you, to know how to troubleshoot it, to deal with the common problems that occur, to resolve them automatically, maybe those can be adopted. And then that takes away a whole class of vulnerabilities. Hey, there's a CVE that affects XYZ. They got to be able to write to the file system. Meh, that CVE is gone. Move on. We'll patch it when it makes sense. So, like, when I say rethink the whole stack, the whole way of operations, I mean the whole thing, soup to nuts. Like all of the assumptions that operations people have today about operations, I think they're all largely invalid in 10 years.
Yeah. Okay, makes sense. I haven't seen anybody with your experience, Randy, doing coding anymore. But you showed me a full application to manage, a rack you built overnight. And how do you see there is a shift of this? You were mentioning your code commits are increasing this year a lot. And do you see a shift with AI that has given you more opportunities? Let's say your personal interns just working for you, you are thinking and they are doing.
No, it's the other way around. It's all the experienced guys. Sean O'Meara, our CTO at Mirantis, built this incredible bomb calculator for building AI factories that allows you to basically select your GPU clusters and systems, your network topologies. It helps you build like the bombs. Like it's pretty sophisticated. Jerry Ibrahim, who runs our Coordinate AI engineering effort, he's using the AI tools. Our CEO, Alex Friedland, who does not have a technical background, has used Cloud Code to build a Minesweeper game. It's the more experienced folks who have an open mind, who actually see the value of the tools. They have less time, but they've got domain expertise and knowledge in areas that are that just the youngest people don't have. I actually see younger people struggling more because they don't have the domain expertise. I was thinking about this the other day. Like, if you are talking about AI assisted coding, there's a lot of discussion around humans have something that the AI can't do. They have taste. And when I think about operations, I think about, the main thing that humans have that, agents don't have is judgment, right? Something's going on in production, 7-1, you're down, you're losing millions of dollars an hour. You have to make a decision about what you do, roll forward with the fix that's unproven, or try to reproduce it somewhere else. Well, an AI agent, can't make a good judgment about that. It doesn't have the business context. It doesn't know about the risk rewards. Even if you were to feed it into it real time, you couldn't manage it well enough so that it could make a decision, and it can't take responsibility for that decision, which is most important. Responsibility and accountability, that's like a human team effort that's got to happen, because the team's responsible for the business. And so, I don't think that judgment can be pulled out of operations and handed to agents. So there's no way for humans to be pulled out of operations. So the fundamental thing here is that, again, you know, I don't think that we have even gotten to the point where we understand exactly how it's going to impact operations. The only thing I'm certain of is that it is going to transform it completely, top to bottom.
People often talk about, I mean, the recent trend is about context. Any AI agent would perform more accurate, more better if you give it correct context at the correct time. Do you think building this or converting this tribal knowledge and institutional knowledge into something more consumable by agents is going to help?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was talking about, kind of with my pet project, right? Like, the architecture's manager's job is to create kind of the overall piece of that, which is that there
A
has to
bird's eye
be,
view of everything that's running. Yeah.
yeah, there has to be a way for the shared memory of humans in operations teams that we've had in the past, that is a combination of the tribal knowledge and the written knowledge, to be into some kind of living set of documents in whatever format you think makes sense, markdown, rag, whatever works for you, that is shared between the humans and agents. And as it updates, whether it's an agent or human, as the system updates, the enshrine memory and knowledge of the system updates. I mean, that, I don't think there's any way forward except that way.
Do you think only technical information is required, or business context would also be beneficial for building such tools?
Yeah, I absolutely think that some business context makes sense. I mean, you take the example of having sort of a SOC engineer agent that, sees vulnerabilities and, makes some kind of initial assessment on them. It may be wrong. It's fine if it's wrong. What it's doing is it's saving a bunch of time on the initial assessment, as if it was a junior SOC engineer, but giving that SOC engineer, some kind of context about the business, especially at the intersection of the system architecture, is important. And so I'll give you a concrete example of that. If we were to look at, say, eBay systems, not all API endpoints are the same. Some of those are going to have a much more dramatic impact on revenue than others, right? Like an API endpoint that, say, lists inventory for a small shop managing their inventory on eBay. That's an impact to that set of customers, and it's an inconvenience, but it's not directly impacting revenue. So being able to describe not only system, but how the system interacts with business, and what parts of the system are more vital than others, is absolutely something that needs to be enshrined, so that some decision making can be informed by it.
And also, one thing, Randy, is what I feel is code is becoming fungible now. You know, you don't have to pretend to have one architecture and a quarter of product shipment. That waterfall model or even the sprint model is no longer valid anymore. You can scrape it out altogether and build a new one overnight. Do you
Yeah,
think it's going to
when
impact?
code is cheap, what happens? What I used to say back in the day on the around the cloud stuff, and I think you'll like this, is it was a little bit before the pets and cattle thing, but I still use it for a long time. As I said, you have to ask your developers what can they do if they can have 10,000 servers for an hour for $100. And it turns out there's a whole bunch of things that unlocks because they couldn't do that before. And now there's a similar question, which is, what does it mean if you can generate 100,000 lines of code in less than a day that does a specific thing? What does that unlock for you? And you see people doing it all the time now, like proof of concepts cost nothing, absolutely nothing, and you can prove it out in less than a day a lot of the time. So it's just going to have a major change in the way that we think about how we do systems engineering, systems thinking, and build even businesses.
Awesome. I like the line. Absolutely. This is what we also. I was learning in one of the mentoring sessions for uh, as a founder, right? If you have all the $1,000,000 that you need, and what are you going to do? Think in those terms. So this this totally like opens up a lot of possibility, and even I personally don't have an answer. What would I do if everything is at my fingertips? And it's just that sky is the limit. Whatever I can imagine, I can deploy, develop at an instant. So it's very interesting, and very interesting times to be in at the phase, right? At Mirantis, what is happening, Randy?
What do you mean in terms of what?
What are you doing? Anything in particular? Very
What am I
interesting.
doing at Mirantis?
Yeah.
I'm doing a lot of stuff. We've made this pretty hard pivot over towards really working on building AI factories initially for NeoClouds who are adopting those eventually for enterprises as well. We are, it's great because the executive team, especially Alex Friedland, our CEO, Boris, who is one of the original co-founders, along with Alex, and now is kind of advisor, and Sean, our CTO and my boss, all kind of came to the conclusion, after sort of a weight of evidence that we needed to be kind of a AI forward. I'm going to avoid AI native, but an AI forward company. And, when they signaled and unlocked the gates to the rest of the business, people really leaned in hard on that. And you can see everybody at Mirantis really trying to use the tools, even people who I thought wouldn't. And I think we're still trying to figure that out, but it's changed the tenor and tone of kind of what we're doing and how fast we're moving. I'd say we're kind of a little discombobulated because it's early stages of broad adoption. Some of us have been at it for a while, but now like the whole company seems to be trying to use it. And what that's resulting in is a business that is trying to reinvent itself kind of from top to bottom. And I think largely getting there, but only time will tell. And so for me, it means that because the AI factor changes, I'm getting to really work directly with some of the data center grade GPUs. And it is really fun to have 8B300 GPUs at your disposal and run DeepSeek V4 Pro, at scale, to run Qwen 3, Qwen 3.6. Those are all really impressive new open weight models. It's the second thing it means is that as one of the early adopters and one of the people who's gone further and farther with AI agents and agentic coding than others, like I'm getting to mentor and help others with the adoption process, which is great. And then the third, which is the thing that always gets me pumped up, which is why I'm here on this podcast with you, is I just know that AI ops or agentic ops, whatever you want to call it, is going to be a big deal. And, for anybody out there who's listening, I'm usually about 3 years early to with my ideas. So what I do is wait about 3 years and then do an agentic ops startup. Sorry, Priyank. because that'll probably be about the right timing. I don't know why I'm always 3 years too early, but I always follow my nose, and my nose right now says that AIOps is going to be really interesting. But I'm and Priyank are pretty far ahead of the curve, I think, on this. But that area is just keen to me. I goes back to that story I told at the beginning of the podcast of like walking in and finding everybody doing everything manually, and I automated everything. Like, if computers can do something for me, I want them to do it for me. I don't want to do the boring stuff. I have zero interest in this. Like, I just really have zero interest in this. So, I think lazy operations guys, just like lazy developers, are the best. It means that they're going to put the effort in to make their lives easier. And, we should unlock those kinds of personalities and let them go at it. And, to a certain degree, that's somewhat my role in the business. I've got a lot of other stuff to do, but, Sean has asked me to really focus on, AI ops, especially for AI factories and what it means. And, I think the first kind of like, dark factories that we'll see, that are mostly run by AI agents on the operation side will be the NeoClouds, almost certainly. They've got to get to a certain amount of scale, you know, and they've got to be sort of the power plants that feed all everything else. And operational scale, the lesson learned, from the hyperscalers in the cloud days is that operational scale comes from intense amounts of automation, building homogeneous power plants, right? Google famously was managing 10,000 servers with one admin and trying to get to 100,000 servers with one admin. NeoClouds similarly have to have kind of that same kind of level of scale in order to succeed and to compete against the hyperscalers who already have that as DNA. So you've got to bring AI ops in to basically enable these folks. That's why this acquisition by Iron for Mirantis is so important. We can bring in a bunch of that DNA. And I'm hoping, that part of what I'm going to contribute to our future together is being really on that AI ops side and the guy who knows how to get 10x on our operations folks, even possibly 100x.
Awesome. This is awesome. Talking about the generational impact that you have made, Randy, what is the handoff going to look like for you? Or is there going to be a handoff, first of all?
Yeah, I don't think I've really seen handoffs. It seems to be fairly smooth transitions because between any generation of um, operators or tech people, you see as many people who lean forward as lean back. I've got a good buddy of mine, Jeff White, shout out Jeff, who is a bit older than me. And he's like all in, doing all kinds of crazy stuff with agents, building teams, building communication systems between them. I think that in the same way, this is going to sound like a really crazy analog, but in the same way that kind of smartphones kind of empowered older people who decided to use them because it helped them get through life a little bit better in lots of ways. And we'll see even more of that now with Chat GPT. I mean, I think that older folks who even older than me in their 60s, 70s who embrace and use new technologies like smartphones find out that even though they're scary at first, they're actually way easier to use as computers than computers have been, and LLMs and AI democratizes it even further. And I think in that same way in the tech industry, you see some older generations than me who are more empowered because maybe they want to do a certain kind of project, and it's just easier to do now that they've got the tooling, but they've all got all that domain knowledge, like I said, kind of judgment, expertise, domain knowledge, wisdom. Those are things that AI doesn't have that older folks bring to the party. I actually think the challenge is harder on the younger generation. I really, really worry about some of the technologists who come in. I had a real young gentleman working for me, a couple in the Philippines, and they had a real hard time really using the AI tools in like compelling ways. They wanted to abdicate decision making to the AI. It's like if you're going to be a scientist, or not a scientist, a mathematician, abdicating all your calculations to a calculator, as opposed to learning more about the domain of math and getting to the point where you can use something like R to do very complex things with mathematics based off of your understanding. And I don't think, and this is my personal bias, that schools do a very good job of teaching. Most schools, not all, but most don't do a very good job of teaching important things, like critical thinking, domain expertise. They focus more on sort of rote memorization and regurgitation, especially at sort of like that high school level. When you get into universities, more elite universities are better, but there's still an over index on um, knowledge as opposed to wisdom, regurgitation of information as opposed to systems understanding, systems thinking, critical analysis, those things that would actually empower somebody to be more effective using the AI tools. One of the problems I saw with a lot of young adopters of AI tools, again, like I said, is they abdicate their thinking, do this thing for me, as opposed to explain to me how this system works. Explain to me how XYZ language works. You can have them, you could literally sit there for hours and hours and hours and have a AI tool walk you through, say, how the Go language works, how the internals work, how the compiler works, the difference between functions and interfaces, how memory is managed. Like, you could have it basically train you on how to use Go better, which would make you better at using the agent to write Go code. But I don't see younger folks thinking in those terms. It's like, oh, I'm just going to have it go write this function for me. And then they can't really understand what the function does. I am regularly using the tools to explain to me how systems work that I don't know. As for example, I was never much of an expert at Ceph, the distributed storage software, SDS. And I needed to bring Ceph up for some of the AI factory labs that I've been tasked with building for Mirantis. And, I wanted it, I could have it go build the Ceph clusters for me, but I started with, kind of explain to me how Ceph works and the difference between its pools and, its clusters, which is different than a lot of other storage systems, and really walking through and having it compare against storage systems that I knew really well about its idioms and the way semantics and the way it does things and the way others do things, so that I had a better architectural understanding of the way Ceph works, so that I could make better design decisions about how Ceph would be laid out on the systems I was building. And that's just normal now. That a big part of how I'm using the tools is to have them educate me on how to do things. And I think younger folks don't understand that's where they need to start.
Do you think this is because, so one of the, how do I phrase it, uh, approaches that we have learned is by doing stuff, by experiencing the problems and doing stuff. Younger folks did not even have that experience. Now everything is, very garnished and polished and given to them in a very easy way that they never learned it the hard way. Is it going to be a bit difficult for newer folks to adopt things?
I, I I think there's this notion of a J curve, right? Which is that you start to adopt these tools and you do really poorly at first, and then you kind of, as you go down, you kind of learn enough that you come back up, and then you sort of get productive eventually. I think for older folks, the J curve's got a very shallow dip, and for younger folks, it's got a very very deep dip where they are not very productive and they are making mistakes they can't see, and it'll take a while to bottom out. And at the same time, they probably, are so AI pilled that they think that they're like, doing amazing work just because they're valuing the quantity over the quality. Um, in my personal experience, the only way to learn anything is to break stuff. You must break things. I think the danger in AI land is that you can't see what you're breaking if you're not the one breaking it. So if I had any piece of advice, it would be to really try to deconstruct things and to get into the guts, especially as you're learning about what you're trying to build, about like how it works, and to actively break things, to do experiments. Like if you're just running to kind of the end goal constantly, you can't see the messes you're making, they're hidden. Whereas if you're doing kind of like, separate spikes and experiments at different times, on subcomponents so that you understand them, you will learn more. As a for example, say you're building a component of a piece of software that is an API that um, is used to control some subsystem. Like take some time and run an experiment to see if you can break the API. Learn about fuzz testing. Learn about security and how you might attack the API. Spend the actual time to use the AI tools to help you try to break your own system. Have that hacker mentality, because if you can have that hacker mentality, you could try to break your own stuff. Then you're gonna, learn a bunch through that process. So I think it's really easy to get on that dopamine treadmill and like, I'm making lots of progress and it all works, and not to realize that, under the covers, you're maybe making sort of a house of cards that could blow up. If you come at it with the assumption of that you are making a house of cards, and you start to say, how can I blow up the stuff that I'm working on, then you're more likely to get the learning that's necessary to level yourself up faster and shallow out that J curve on adoption and get to a point of being extremely productive.
I think you answered it in the previous question itself, but still wanted to hear. Let's say you are starting your career today as a 25-year-old, and what would Randy do, or how would he approach the industry?
Um, I'm not really sure how to answer that question, honestly. It's a little tough because I think, I kind of grew up at a time where I was really steeped in computers. I got access to them at a young age. And it was at that time when you had to kind of get in and understand the guts of the computer more than you do now, right? I mean, these phones, are big, huge, monstrous computers compared to what I grew up with, and super capable, and you need no knowledge to use them. So I don't, I'm not sure I can put myself in the shoes of a 25-year-old. All I can do is observe some of the folks like the Filipino guys who work for me who are at that age, and the thing that I observed is that their computer fundamentals were not great. Didn't really understand how CPUs work or RAM, how CPUs and RAMs interconnect, how CPU and RAM interconnects, how storage systems work. I don't know if that's the Philippines or more broadly. I'm not sure um, what it looks like because I haven't interacted with a lot of 25-year-olds. Um, so there's a strength and a weakness to being a 25-year-old coming into the industry. So the strength, which to a certain degree is also the weakness, is that they don't have preconceptions, and so they're going to adopt the new tools right out of the gate, and they're going to be AI pilled like right out of the gate. And I that's a big strength. A lot of older folks aren't going to do that, and they're going to hold themselves back. But it's also a weakness because not understanding what's happening underneath is a problem. And like I said, like, um, I think that spirit of curiosity is the biggest thing. When I started, when I was in the industry in the early days, I just had this crazy love of computers and everything about them. Like it had been my hobby as a teenager. So, I wanted to know everything. I remember in 1992, I'd been using the internet since about 1986. So I'd been using it for 6 years as a 21-year old, and which was really abnormal. And I saw the internet getting talked about on TV, and nobody knew what the internet was. And I was like, holy cow, man, this thing that has been amazing for me is now going to be a big deal. And I was like, I don't know anything about networking. I want to go learn about networking. I deliberately went and found a job to at an ISP so I could learn networking like really deeply. I had been doing some networking as a sysadmin, but I didn't really know it. So I was like, I want to do networking. So I did networking. And then at some point, I was like, I want to do security. I've done a little bit, double here and there, but I really want to do it. So I went and I did security for a while. And that's the way it always was. Like, I found some area that I was like super interested in. I'm like, I'm going to go figure this out. I'm going to go learn it. And I'd say that's the thing. If you can come at this more like I want to learn and understand this domain rather than I want to deliver this app and make X many dollars, by putting it on the app store, then you're one of like, a million other 25-year-olds who think they've got the greatest idea in the world for a new app that's on the app store. And because you're AI powered, you think you can go like crank this thing out. And if instead you're really focusing on the problem domains and learning the problem domains, I think your outcomes are much likely to be better because by understanding the problem domain, when you go and actually leverage the AI tools to build what you need, you're more likely to succeed.
Makes sense. The title of the episode for the podcast was Placeholder, Randy. I'm choosing Spirit of Curiosity as the title now.
All right, I like it. Let's do it.
Awesome. Uh, all right, I think we have spoken a lot about the practical use cases of AI, spoken about the patterns that you were seeing from your career journey versus what you're seeing now. How do you think the future is going to be driven? An autonomous or a AI ops approach. You're saying 3 years, you're early for 3 years, right? So within 3 years, we are going to see a lot of automation and AI ops based systems, right? Uh, I think we covered a lot, and I really love to talk a lot more with you, but I think we should confine it here. We could do episode 2.
Yeah, we
Otherwise,
can always do another episode.
people are going to get bored. Not from you just seeing my face. Uh, Final messages for my audiences who are both young, new to the industry. I think you covered a lot in your last uh, section, but coming new to the industry, what they should be aiming towards, and some serious folks who have been reluctant to adopt to AI, why they should see things a bit differently now.
I, I mean, I guess I feel like everybody kind of finds their own path to a certain degree. And in a way, the AI tools empower that. So maybe your path is like jumping on the bandwagon and trying to deliver, the first app on the app store that allows people to schedule their dogs for a dog wash because you're going to make $1 billion business out of it. And you've got to go down that path before you figure out that path doesn't work. Or maybe your path is to, kind of attach yourself to a mentor and, level up slowly through, kind of an internship kind of apprentice master type, thing. I can't really say. I think everybody's a little bit different. I personally, when I was young, had to, and still today, mostly have to just teach myself everything. I'm not good at taking like courses and things like that, but everybody's a little bit different. What I would say is kind of to your point about the overall theme here is that you do have to keep your curiosity engaged. You do have to go understand how computers work and computing systems and systems theory and critical thinking. You do have to go kind of establish a bunch of fundamentals. It's like I'm going to give like a terrible analogy, but imagine that, suddenly everybody could have an exoskeleton that made them really strong and very athletic and fast, and they could jump really high, so they could all be, in theory, NBA basketball players. But if they didn't have foundational basketball skills, they're going to be shit NBA basketball players, because the leveling of the playing field empowers everybody equally. So while you may suddenly feel superpowered, the people with the domain expertise are just as superpowered. So the only way that you can actually get to a point where you can be as successful as you want to be is to go get the domain expertise. And part of what I'm saying is that if you're the real smart AI pilled person that you think you are, you'll use the AI to help you go get that domain expertise, which it is more than capable of. It can teach you how to understand these systems. But if you just use it to do your thinking for you, if you abdicate responsibility for the domain expertise to the AI, then you'll only get what it's got. And what it's doing is it's regurgitating the existing sum of human knowledge, right? If you want to be able to go past the edge of human knowledge, if you want to break new ground, you personally have to have the domain expertise. So you can build it with the AI tools, but you can't abdicate it to the AI tools. And so that's the main thing I'd say. And then to the old farts, the graybeards, whatever you want to call them, to the folks who've been around the block, that domain expertise you have is the thing that's going to, make you super powered by using the tools. And you got to go leverage it. I spent a long time with my brother. I'm going to spend some more helping him kind of understand what's going on. But he really knows security operations. And so when he gets up to speed, he is going to be like a super badass using the tools. And excuse me. And so I think that it's important for everybody to start, leveraging the tools, because you have to build the muscles, you have to learn. And if you've got the domain expertise, you're going to be a badass pretty quickly. If you don't, you use it to level yourself up, and then you'll be a badass, maybe not quickly, but in relatively short order.
And just for the spirit of curiosity, thanks a lot, Randy, for taking out time for the podcast. Uh, I'm pretty sure people are gonna love it, and they will have a lot of more questions. Be ready for episode 2 of the same, and whatever questions do come, I'll send it over so that you can answer them on social medias.
All right. Awesome. Appreciate you, Priyank. It was great.
Thanks a lot, Randy. Thanks for your time.
All right. Take care, man.